Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Kara Burnham, and I am a faculty member at the University of Western States. And I'd like to welcome you to this UWS hosted forum. We have created this forum today in honor of National Coming Out Day. And so this will first appear on October 11th. And so what we are here today to do is to explore creating a more inclusive community for the chiropractic world. And we're going to do that today with members of the LGBTQ community. And the folks that you see before you are panelists that have been invited and volunteered to share a little bit about themselves and about their story. And so what we're hoping for today is we're hoping to engage folks who are looking to create a more welcoming, inclusive environment. And we're also hoping to reach folks who identify within this community and give them some information about how to function in the world of chiropractic as we all work together to make this a more inclusive, welcoming profession. So to begin then, I'd like to take a moment to allow each panelist to introduce themselves. And so the way we're going to do that is I'm just going to call on them and they will share a little bit about themselves. So I'll go around my screen here. And so Dr. Cohen, you are to my immediate right.
Hello, I'm Becky Cohen. I am a queer non-binary chiropractor in Portland, Oregon, and I run a queer and trans-specific chiropractic clinic called Q Chiropractic. And my pronouns are they, them.
Yay, welcome, Dr. Cohen. So next on my screen is Dr. Fauché.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beau Fauché. I practice in Dallas, Texas at Medical City, Dallas. It's the largest hospital in North Texas. I'm queer and I'm non-binary, and my pronouns are he, she, and I'm really excited to be able to join these folks on the panel today because I hold these people in such high esteem. So thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Next on my screen is Dr. Staub. Dr. Staub, we are not hearing you. You want to try that again if you can? Nope. Well, let's move on to Dr. Laflin, and maybe we'll come back to Dr. Staub, see if we can get that audio working.
I'm Dr. Ryan Laflin, originally from Wichita, Kansas. Currently have a practice in Vancouver, Washington, as well as over in Gresham, Oregon. Pronouns are he, him, and identifies gay.
All right, let's circle back to Dr. Staub, see where we are.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Weird. Okay, I don't know what happened. I was unmuted. I'm Dr. Karina Staub. I'm a chiropractor, and I also teach at University of Western States as an adjunct instructor. And I recently started a University of Washington research fellowship for complementary and integrative health interventions. I identify as a lesbian, and my pronouns are she, her.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here. And Dr. Lady.
I'm Dr. Suzanne Lady. I am a chiropractor. I've been a chiropractor for 24 years and in practice for almost 20 until some injuries stopped that process. And I'm now teaching at the University of Western States. I've been there about 10 years. I'm cisgender, I'm female, and I identify as lesbian.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you for taking a moment to introduce yourselves. And so the way we're going to proceed now is that I have a list of questions. And so this would be a bit of a facilitated discussion. And so what is going to happen is I'm going to read the question for the benefit of the audience, and then I'm going to ask various members of this panel to provide answers. And hopefully you all will find these answers to be informative and different from one another. So we're looking to explore different aspects of these questions by having a number of panelists here. Towards the end of our presentation today, if there's time, we will look to the chat. We do have a very small audience with us today, so we'll look to the chat to see if there's any questions that we can expound on towards the end, okay? All right, so the first question that I'd like to explore today is, what are some ways you can create an LGBTQ plus friendly practice and an inclusive, welcoming space for all individuals? Okay, and so I'd like to start with Dr. Fauché, give their input here.
Thanks, Dr. Burnham. You know, I think the most important thing that we can do when it comes to patient-facing information is, use affirming language right out of the gate, right? So if we have inclusive paperwork, which we should have inclusive paperwork, if it's downloadable, it should be up to date. It should match whatever's used in the practice, and not for the purpose of like virtue signaling to let the person know, hey, I'm hip, I'm cool that you're gay or whatever, right? It's that we have these practices and we're prepared for you, whatever your circumstances are, in a way that is not othering, in a way that is actually inclusive. And I think that it is helpful, at least as a queer non-binary provider, is sometimes when patients call, they'll ask questions about the competence of the provider. And so our front desk staff are all trained to be able to answer questions appropriately, and also reassure the patient and email the paperwork so that we can set the stage for really competent care. So long answer to say, it starts at the front desk with the paperwork, and that's where I start my judgment with care I receive. Thanks.
Thank you. So Dr. Cohen, you mentioned in your introduction that your practice is sort of marketed to a certain group of folks. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that and how you made that choice.
Yeah, my clinic is called Q Chiropractic. It's just sort of a way to like signal to the queer community, like, hey, you're safe here. Like this space is, I wanted to create a space that was like for the queer and trans community, not just a space where, they're safe. Like the entire clinic is catered to them. And that starts for me on my business cards. Like I list my pronouns, I use logos and pride flags and things to just kind of make it clear to folks that the space is for them. But I also think that it's important to mention that like the second you do a thing like that, the second you market to that community, you have a really big responsibility to show up for them and to do your due diligence to educate yourself on how to actually make these people feel safe and how to give them the care that they need. So, being accepting is great, but taking it a step further to actually be like knowledgeable and aware. And then making, a lot of the ways you can kind of slip up with this community is assumptions based, and I agree with Dr. Fauché about the paperwork being the biggest thing. Like, you can start off, if a trans person comes into your office and there's no way for them to show you and to tell you who they are, then you actually like physically haven't created a space for them, and you've kind of lost them before you even meet them at that point. So, having things like sex and gender identity on your forms, pronouns, preferred name, making it clear that that the stuff that's on their insurance form might be different than how they want to be referred to. That's all really, really valuable and important.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. I really appreciate Dr. Cohen and Dr. Fauché speaking to sort of slightly different but similar aspects of creating an inclusive environment. And I'd like to then invite Dr. Lady if you have any other additional comments on this question.
Yeah, thank you. So I think it's really important to remember that the minute that an LGBTQ patient walks into your clinic, they're forming a first impression of you. And it's really important to create a space that they do feel welcome. And these patients are looking for evidence that it's a safe place. So, it's important to put evidence in your waiting area, whether it's a Bill of Rights, a patient Bill of Rights, or maybe they're posters or pamphlets of same-sex couples or ethnically, racially diverse patients. I think that's an important thing to send a message. And to Dr. Cohen's point, it's not just the talk, you've got to do the walk, right? So you have to learn about the LGBTQ plus community. That's really important.
All right, thank you folks for that first question. And now I'm going to move on to our next question, and we'll move to some of our other panelists as well. So for question 2, what are some ways you've handled bias from patients within the profession in general or from patients themselves? So I'd like to ask Dr. Laflin to answer this question first, and we'll move on to some other folks.
Oh, sure. I've actually been pretty fortunate. I haven't gotten a whole lot of bias from others in the profession. Actually, more so in the profession, a lot of people, willing to help out, which is great that we were able to do this today and kind of pay it forward in a way. But as far as from maybe potential patients or people that are in the workspace that I'm in, I've got 2 locations that are in a gym setting. So we've got the potential for the bias because of the sexuality and identity, but there's also like I'm a bigger guy working in a gym, and so I don't typically have like the the gym bod that people may say. So there's a bias coming from there. So, but in both areas, whether it be physically how I look, and then also with my identity, I think that's where I can let my credentials speak for themselves. I've become a DC. I've gotten a couple of master's degrees. I got a CCSP, so that's where I really had to promote my knowledge over what people may perceive me as just by, looking at me or whatnot. So yeah, I think like, having, a bio outside of your office, if you're in a similar setting like me, would definitely help show that you are valuable in healthcare and in the setting that you're in. So.
Thanks, Dr. Laflin. I'm going to go back to Dr. Fauché for just a second, and then I'm going to turn over to Dr. Staub. Dr. Fauché?
This is such a tough question because, when, I think about the experience of folks who are intersectional and how they, encounter things in the, like in a doctor's office, was I treated poorly because I was a woman or because of this or, whatever that case might be, it can be sort of compounding. So when I encounter patients, I'm clear that people self-select. So I'm a manual therapist above all other things in terms of what I do once we have a diagnosis and a treatment plan, right? So I doctor them and then I touch them, right? So if there's some level of discomfort, they sort of self-select, right? So I practice in the South. I occasionally get questions from my patients, it's like the side eye, like the, like if I have on my wedding ring, they're like, so what does your wife do? So when I encounter things like that, I'm pretty unapologetic about it. If the person is even remotely uncomfortable, there's another doctor in my office. And so I make sure that I make an introduction to them. If I get a read that feels like for them to be able to get the best care that they need, it's probably best for them to know that we have another doctor. And in the profession, what I've experienced is that oftentimes chiropractors are a little more socially and religiously, I think, conservative than other provider types. I'll make a broad general statement, and I'm willing to go on the record and testify for that one. So what I've gotten along the way are the things where people say stuff like, I don't agree with your lifestyle. And I'm like, we're both doctors. I don't know, we both borrowed a lot of money. But more importantly, I won't collaborate with those people. Those aren't the kind of people that I'm, like trying to build up in some way. But what I don't do is tell them that they're terrible people or do the thing like cancel them off my Facebook or Instagram or whatever, because I do want to be able to engage them in some way that might be useful. And I do have a little bit of a broad platform, Dr. Burnham. I'm the committee chair for the Committee on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the American Chiropractic Association. So because I'm like this highly visible queer in this big organization, I'm just, walk my privilege all over the place wherever I can. And so if there is bias, it's not something that necessarily affects me very directly.
Thank you, Dr. Fauché. That's, yeah, that's really, it's interesting to think about when we do have the ability to impact others in that way, particularly, for example, in your ACA role, and what that looks like, whether or not one uses that to change others or to simply educate. There is definitely certain responsibility there. So I thank you for pointing that out. Dr. Staub, what else might you add to this conversation?
Ooh, that is tough to follow. Thanks, Bo. I would say that, you know, bias is everywhere. It's not just LGBTQ, it's racial and among other topics. And I've experienced bias one time as a chiropractor. I've done locum work. And so I was filling in for another chiropractor who had some other chiropractors at their office. I actually had a weird situation. It was with a male patient. Typically, if there's going to be bias with, you know, a female that identifies as a lesbian, it's going to be probably more with a female patient that there might be some bias versus a male. But I had a male encounter that didn't go super well. He just didn't want to see me, and I said that was fine. That was his right. And at the end of the day, it's about the patient. It's not about me. And so I referred him to the other chiropractor that was in the office. The other thing I would say is that, you know, when bias comes up, you kind of have a few options, right? So you can either be combative, which is probably what I would have done about 10 years ago when I was younger. But I'm hopefully a little bit more educated now that I won't do that. You can either brush it off, or you can educate the patient or have an open conversation if you have the time to do that. Most of the time I just brush it off, but those are the recommendations that I would make for handling bias in the workplace.
Thank you for that. And thank you for always reminding us that it really is about the patient. I think that's super important. I'm going to toss it right back to Dr. Fauché for just a moment here. Let them have another comment, please.
Thanks. You know, when Dr. Staub mentioned the bit about bias, you know, it did bring to mind for me that, you know, one of the things that I get from patients and also from other folks, not just other chiropractors, but, you know, like I practice, like in the hospital here, there are like almost 1,800 associated doctors. So what happens is I get the stuff that's like racist, that's misogynistic, that's transphobic, and that's, you know, whatever those biases are. So what I have a tendency to do, and Dr. Staub, thanks for reminding me that this is a really important part of the way I navigate this, is I do, my no game is really good. So I do solid boundary setting with my mother, and I would also do it with your mother, even if she were my patient, right? So, you know, I say, hey, we can't have that conversation. You can't make me complicit in that sort of thing. So let this be an off limits topic. And most people, when they realize I'm not on board with whatever that is, and this will be obviously everyone else's experience as well, when we set that boundary, the person typically apologizes and moves on, right? Because it's not socially acceptable for you at my job to try to change my mind about whatever it is. But thank you, Dr. Staub, for that reminder.
Excellent, folks. So I appreciate all those answers and that back and forth. That's really fun to see that. I am going to move on to question 3, however, and now I'm going to take a slightly different twist here, and I'm going to ask these doctors to maybe share with us what they've learned from their experiences as a patient. So they're as LGBTQ plus patients. What have you learned from that experience, and then how can that help you as a practitioner create a more positive experience for others, or develop a practice that creates a more positive experience based on your own background? So I'm going to ask Dr. Cohen to speak to that a little bit, please.
Yeah, my experiences as a queer and trans patient have not been great. Pretty much across the board. I very rarely have a doctor's appointment where somebody doesn't slip up some major element of my identity, whether it be my name, my pronouns, my gender, my physical body, my wife's pronoun. I mean, you know, and it's all assumption based. Like, I walk in, they're like, all right, you're a woman, right? I'm like, no, I'm not. And they're like, got it. So you're a man. I'm like, no, I'm not. And so you just, and that all comes down to forms, right? They either didn't have the right stuff on the form, or they didn't read it, or they don't know what it means when they do read it. So like, that's all super preventable. And it does kind of tie into how I treat people, you know, like a lot of it is exposure and knowledge. And one of the biggest complaints or feedback that the trans community has for the healthcare community is like, it is not our job to educate you on who we are and how we need it. It's not okay for us as doctors to be learning on patients in front of them. Like it's really not, you know, we didn't learn how to adjust necks on patients. This is arguably potentially more traumatic. And so I really think we all have a huge responsibility to go educate ourselves with our own time and our own resources, and not expect our patients to teach us about their healthcare needs. You know, that's the biggest takeaway. And then be humble, and if you do slip up, like, it's also not okay to like make the patient have to make you feel better. Like, apologize, fix it, move on, don't do it again. Like, those are the biggest things. And then, you know, that knowledge helps you be a better practitioner, and it helps you have better relationships with your patients. Because, you know, if somebody comes to me and they say, oh, I've got top surgery scheduled next month, and, you know, my response is going to be like, awesome, who's your surgeon? Which surgery are you having? And that takes us as like our relationship down a totally different road than the doctor who says like, what's that? Like, you know, like, you can set yourself apart as a specialist and somebody who's here to help and like be a huge asset to this patient, or you can take up a bunch of their time and money to like fill the gaps in your education. And one of those things is awesome, and the other is a bummer. So that's how I feel about that.
Great, thank you, Dr. Cohen. So Dr. Fauché, any other comments on your experiences as a patient and how that's informed the way you practice?
Sure. So there are a couple things that come to mind. As Dr. Cohen mentioned, you know, even when I go to practices that are billed as, you know, highly inclusive, folks still miss the mark. And it's the correction that oftentimes makes it more reprehensible than just having made the mistake and just stuck with the mistake, right? So there are two things that come to mind. So my very first, really most amazing experience was a really long time ago. I was looking for a new primary care provider, and right at the top of the page, the very top question, even above the place for the name, was, what is your preferred method of contraception? And I wrote homosexuality, because I'm tongue-in-cheek and, you know, whatever. The doctor has to be clear that I'm going to be who I am, right? So, and this is like in the, I don't know, 1990s, right? Late 1990s. So I go in, the doc says, oh, this is really funny. So now I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and they may feel like they're asking you too much information. But depending on the way that you answer this question will then dictate what sort of exams we order for you, or what sort of follow-up we order. And I thought, I said, so really, what are you asking? And he wanted to know about my sex behavior so that they could do appropriate examinations. And it was so skillful and so unexpected, right? And so that's the kind of doctor that I want to be. I don't have to know everything. I don't have to, you know, I don't have to, you know, understand every aspect of every person's being, but I have to be able to interact in a skillful way that allows the patient to sort of like settle into agreeing to get good health with me, right? Recently I had a rough experience. So I went to see a specialist at our hospital, and this specialist does care that is typically sex specific or somewhat gendered, right? So on the intake form, I fill out all my stuff, and it's about a consult for a procedure. So go in the room, getting ready for the exam, and the doc had me wait 50 minutes. And you should know that nobody at my office waits 50 minutes without being seen. So I'm waiting 50 minutes with my paperwork already done when I get there. The doctor comes in, looks at my paperwork and says, so for this procedure, you'll need to have your wife pick you up. And I said, I don't have a wife. And he looked at me sort of confused because it's like around like a sort of reproductive health, right? And said, well, you marked that you're married. And I was like, you don't practice at the biggest hospital in North Texas and think that the only person that someone who looks like me could be married to is a woman. I was like, how did that happen? So what I told him is, hey, so I'm going to just, we don't need to do the exam. I won't get the procedure with you, but more importantly, you should know that I won't refer people to you at all, ever, right? We can have a conversation about that if you'd like. And so I left, and so I asked for a referral to a more competent specialist and got one. So Dr. Cohen, your response was so positive. Mine started out like, the medical marketplace has been so amazing to both O'Shea. But what's really appalling is that I'm a doctor in the same place where this doctor goes to work all the time. I could have been like some person off the street and been treated perhaps even more poorly. And so I'm really glad I had a chance to talk about that with you all. I do feel like I should send you all some share of my therapist copay, though, for letting me unpack that with you. So thanks.
We appreciate you sharing with us, Dr. Fauché. We can all learn from each other's experiences for sure. However, I am now going to move on to the fourth question. And so now I'm going to ask each of you to reassume your identity as a physician. And so as you are establishing your practice, so as an LGBTQ provider, folks who are within this community who are coming up into the world of healthcare may have some fears about their identity becoming known. And this may make them concerned about losing patients or business. So I'm going to ask some folks, what advice might you have for a person who's coming into this world as a young doctor? So Dr. Laflin, can you speak a little bit about that? Oops.
Yes, I can. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
So as far as having those fears, I think one, they're completely valid because you just don't know what you're going to come across as far as a patient base. And as a new doc, you don't want to limit your patient base. We got plenty of bills to be paying, student loans and stuff. And so we want to build as big a base practice as possible. Well, what I have found is what has worked best for me in my practice is just to keep the focus off of me. If somebody has been referred over to me, they've never read my bio, they've never been to my website, they don't know who they're going to get when they walk into my office. And let's say if they do pick up on who maybe this doc might be gay, maybe he's not. It's important for me to set them at ease and know that we're here to talk about you. It has nothing to do with me. I think Dr. Staub mentioned that earlier, that it's not about the doc, it's about the patient. And I think that helps people kind of, in a way, chill out if there is any sort of level of discomfort when they're meeting with a new doc in general. Yeah, that's where my focus is, just keeping it on the patient. If we build the rapport and they're coming back to receive care multiple times, and they start asking me questions, and I feel like they are, receptive to my me and my personal life. I can start taking down those, that wall and answer questions that they may have. But for the most part, I like to keep it on the patient because that's what they're paying for, to get care for them, not for me. So.
Thank you, Dr. Laflin. Dr. Staub, do you have anything to add to this notion as folks are becoming doctors?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Kansas, and so I already had some issues back there, but I originally thought when I was going to be a practicing chiropractor that I would not have anything anywhere up in my office, and that I wouldn't talk about anything. However, now that I've been out for a couple years, it's not something that I'm just going to like shout out to somebody as soon as they walk in the room. Hey, I'm gay. I don't do that. I think there's a patient population that you want to have, and I am not necessarily going to take any patient that I, just because I need to pay the bills. I want to have a patient population that I'm going to work well with and that they're going to work well with me, and we're going to have a good rapport. So I wouldn't necessarily say to be afraid about losing a patient population, because you'll eventually determine later down the road of what your population is that you want to work with and who you don't. So that's advice that I would give for that. And then as you get to learn a patient, as Dr. Laflin said previously, you'll kind of gauge where you are with them and what the boundaries are and who you can and can't maybe speak to about certain topics about yourself versus, you know, some other patients where you kind of have that boundary and you cut it off.
Thank you. Dr. Cohen, do you have any comments regarding establishing a practice?
Yeah, I kind of come from a different point of view. I think what everybody else said is totally valid. Not everybody is like me. I do kind of just say that I'm gay right off the bat. I do sort of shout it. But for my that's who I'm here to serve. That's like my whole shtick. So it's, you know, if I just put myself out there, you know, I can slap a photo of me on my website and people are like, I see what's happening here. I get it. Like, you know, and using they, them pronouns, like that tells a lot about me already, you know, like, so I'm here for that community. That's like the whole thing that I want to do. But I also think it's important to note that, like, I'm in Portland where, you know, that I have a lot of privilege in that like I feel safe doing that. There are enough queer and trans people here that I can build an entire practice and make enough money off of it. So I was a little bit nervous when I first graduated. I was like, how do I like make it clear to the queer and trans folks that I'm here for them, but not turn away everybody else? And 5 years down the road, I'm kind of in the opposite position where I'm like, how do I turn away everyone else? And so that I have more space for like queer and trans patients. So it depends on what you want. I also think, like, if you don't feel safe, like if you live in a part of the country where you don't feel safe being out, personally, you can still make your marketing materials and you can still make it clear to patients who need that care that you're a safe space without outing yourself and, you know, publicly. And then once they're in your office, you know, maybe you can, if you wish to divulge it, you can. You don't have to, obviously. But I just think it's important for me to know how much privilege there is in my ability to be safely and confidently out in Portland. But this community is awesome, and I'm thrilled to get to work with them. And I love that I have that opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Dr. Lady, do you have any additional comments about establishing a practice?
Yeah, so I think it's important to not forget to do your due diligence, right, as you're setting up your practice, right? It's important if you're going to be practicing with another doc or you're starting to network with different practitioners in different healthcare arenas, that you actually form and establish those relationships first. I think it's really important that happens so you feel safer in that community to refer people or to get referrals. So that's, or even to work side by side next to someone. So it's really important that you do your due diligence beforehand.
Thank you. So I guess, Dr. Fauché, you're the only one we didn't hear from on that question, and you are in a different region of the country than Portland, Oregon. Is there any comment, or do you feel like the folks have already sort of covered it all?
I just want to say they've said really amazing things. I do not have the privilege of people not recognizing my queerness. So lots of folks don't. What I do though, like, you know, Dr. Cohen nails this on the head. When a person comes to see me and we're not an LGBTQ practice, when they come to see me and there's an indicator on their intake paperwork that they are not cis heteronormative, I disclose my identity, I share my pronouns. If they use a pronoun other than a binary pronoun, or they mark some form of gender diversity, I disclose that to create the safest space for them. And I think that if I didn't work here, and my next thing I think would be really a queer focused environment. Sorry about the phone in the background. Those are the queers calling to schedule with me right now.
All right. So, gosh, I really appreciate each of you sharing your perspective. And it's so nice to have a panel where we do have folks that are practicing in very different, sort of environments. We have a person who's in a gym setting. We have a person who's in the South. We have a person who has a practice that is really dedicated to this community. So I really want to say that I appreciate each of you. And I would now like to sort of close us out here with a question that's a rather big question. And I want to take it now from maybe the practice sort of setting to the chiropractic community at large and the profession at large. And so I'd like to hear from some of y'all about how we can work together to make the profession more inclusive. So I'm actually going to start with Dr. Fauché, because they are the chair of the ACA. And so I think he may have some additional comments about how we can really grow together as a profession.
So, this is a really big question. And as I'm looking at the folks who are on the panel, as you were reading the question, in advance, of course, we've looked at these questions. As I was looking, in reality, Dr. Burnham, each one of the folks who are here has a big contributor to sort of equalizing, normalizing, and bringing to the, both the public and the profession, this sort of visibility, so, between Dr. Staub will be, in all likelihood, the only chiropractor, but certainly the only LGBT chiropractor in her fellowship, right? So, one of the things that comes to mind for me is I certainly do service to LGBT organizations, but I also do lots of service to chiropractic organizations where I am the only LGBT person. And so what I do is I gun for visibility. I really shoot for, how can I be present in a way? How can I be visible in a way that's actually helpful? And then I do the same thing, Dr. Burnham, that you and Dr. Lady have done. It's that you go into the professional space, you've contributed to the chiropractic literature, you open the door, you held it open for me to follow behind, you held it open for Dr. Staub. It's like that, I think, is the biggest thing that we kind of all do, as we model this sort of, public persona of LGBT inclusion. And we don't make ourselves small or hide ourselves away. Not everybody gets to do that, and I'm clear about that. But if you have the ability to show up in a space where they're not typically any person like you, whether it's gender or sexual orientation or family history or whatever the case might be, shine a light on it if you can do so safely and hold the door open. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So actually, I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Lady, to speak a little bit about this with regard to what you see going forward.
Well, I think that it's really quite important to start in chiropractic education to change the way things are taught. We don't want our students learning on patients, to Dr. Cohen's point. So I can speak to Western states and what we are doing currently. We're creating cases. We're actually creating cases that have a transgender topic, and we are going to have our students work on trans patient practice cases with standardized patients. So we're in the process of doing that. We've also started 2 modules on implicit bias for students in their second year that they complete. And as we speak, we are painstakingly going through a curriculum revision, which I say that because it's just arduous and it's a long process. But we are creating threads of this LGBTQ plus topic throughout this new curriculum. So I'm hoping that that is going to make a huge difference. I know that our alumni office is also creating supportive groups for the LGBTQ plus alumni providers that we have. And we've recently hired a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has been working across the university with student, staff, faculty, and administration to implement DEI initiatives. So hopefully we're doing a lot, but we can always do more.
Agreed. Yeah. So UWS is really trying to take the lead on you know, changing the way we educate folks. And so as we sort of shift these thoughts, so we're thinking about education. So Dr. Cohen, do you have any additional thoughts about expanding the chiropractic profession and the welcoming nature of the profession?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that Dr. Lady mentioned the university is doing some work to educate folks. I mean, that's the most important thing I can think of, is that, you know, that this was a huge gap in people's education. And so, you know, it's hard to get chiropractors to go to adjusting seminars in their free time. It's even harder to get them to go to like an LGBTQ diversity, equity, and inclusion seminar. So I'm hoping to make some continuing education at some point in the near future for folks to utilize. You know, it's hard for we're all super busy, but there's clearly a need for it. You know, my inbox is constantly full with Western States grads, you know, asking me to, like, in a text message, tell them how to treat their trans patients. And it's like, I'm not going to be able to do that in a text. So yeah, having more education, hopefully like a full length course work. When I was at Western States, we had I hope this isn't still what's happening, but there was like a 1 hour on a Tuesday at lunch, 30-minute LGBTQ health, and then a 30-minute BDSM course right after. Which those are two super important things. Maybe sends a confusing message that they're linked together in that way. But so hopefully, I know that was like an attempt. I hope that there's more required curriculum. I don't think this curriculum can be optional. You know, it's not optional for you as a provider all the time who comes into your clinic. So you need to be prepared for everybody. And so since this is mostly going out to alumni, I think, you know, taking the time to do some like LGBTQ population continuing ed through like Fenway Institute or Harvard Transgender Center for Transgender Excellence. There's a lot of stuff out there, and it's super important and really valuable.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Yeah, absolutely. So as we are winding down our time together today, the university is going to make available many of the resources that Dr. Cohen just mentioned, as well as some additional ones. I think those are going to be posted on the career page, so and probably other places as well, and in association with this particular panel discussion. I do have sort of a couple of questions that have come into the chat. And so one of the questions is, so if for an individual who is looking to create a more welcoming environment for their practice, do you know, or can you advise folks where to look for, say, paperwork or maybe training that they might engage for their front desk staff? Dr. Fauché mentioned that. So could you maybe point folks in that direction of where they can find those sort of resources? Any of you?
I'd like to, I want to jump right in.
Great.
So here's I do this sort of training a fair amount for both students and docs. So I do continuing ed seminars for organizations and state agencies and other chiropractic stakeholders around this topic in particular. There's a fantastic resource by these two faculty members at the University of Western States about how to use inclusive language for LGBTQ patients, and it's published in the Journal of Chiropractic Humanities, which is certainly going to be linked, I imagine, to the resources. So in that paper, it's Dr. Lady and Dr. Burnham's paper. In that paper, there's a checklist. You can literally print it and check off whether your practice is inclusive or not inclusive. So you don't even have to like recreate any sort of wheel. It's just, it's there. I co-authored a paper with a couple of other folks around trans-specific chiropractic care. It's a few years old and needs to be updated, but both of those papers offer some clear indicators of what to ask on the intake form. And I'm in the practical business of creating a more equitable space for LGBTQ patients. So if you are a person who is not one of these folks on the panel and you want me to take a look at your paperwork, I'll look at it with you. I don't like, it takes 30 seconds. I'm happy to do that. I'm also happy to share the paperwork that I recommend and the paperwork that we use in our practice. But I would start with Dr. Lady and Dr. Burnham's paper. It's free and easy.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you offering to engage with anyone who reaches out. I think that's really very, very powerful. Anyone else have any comments regarding maybe resources? Dr. Cohen mentioned a couple, and as I said, it will be posted in association with this panel discussion. Okay, and then we just have a couple of more minutes. For individuals that are viewing this presentation who actually are within the LGBTQ community, do you folks have any sort of suggestions for the term, I guess, is self-care for folks who identify within the community who are doctors? Does anybody have any comments regarding that?
I don't know about comments, but I think it's important to be kind to yourself and take a mental health day once a week where you're not doing anything with your business or writing chart notes or anything like that. I also think it's really important to maybe have a mentor in mind that you can reach out to if you're having some struggles with the business or patients or anything like that. I think being able to reach out to someone is important to just to talk about things and get a clear head so you can jump right back into it.
I think that's great advice for anyone, and particularly someone who is involved in the very important business of caring for other folks. So any further comments from our panel?
Yeah, I think what Dr. Saab said is great. Because most of my patients, I think we all know that the incidences of trauma are way higher in this population. And so, 80% of my patients are from this group. And I do often feel like my practice is like 50% chiropractic, 50% like processing and like unloading. And it is taxing. It's really rewarding and wonderful, but it's the days where I go in and I'm just doing adjustments, I'm like, whoa, that was super easy. So, having other providers, other people who treat, not only are identified as LGBTQ, but also treat folks from this population and kind of can chat with you and sort of process some of the extra trauma and extra stress that comes along with serving these folks can be really helpful. I'm happy to be one of those people if somebody needs that. But yeah, having some acknowledging that this is like chiropractic plus, and it takes a little bit more of a toll sometimes.
Thank you. Anyone else like to make any additional comments before we close today? All right, hearing none. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Listen, I'm a space taker, right? I mean, the more time we do this, the less time that I have to get up and do, whatever thing is, waiting in the office. So, in the course of building practice, one thing that we didn't talk about in this particular panel that I think has been really important for me as an openly queer non-binary doctor in Dallas, Texas, is I target my relationship building with other culturally competent doctors. So the majority of my patient referrals are either internal referrals or they come to me from a medical provider of some sort. So I go out and I specifically ask for the patients I want. So I love working on this patient. I love this complaint. I like this third-party payer, right? So those are the kinds of conversations that we have. So, we do a fair number of, meetings with other providers to show them what we do or talk to them about what we do. And one of the things that is very interesting is, I work for a hospital-based multi-clinic company. And so we've done some LGBTQ competence training for all of our doctors, of course, and then, all of the support staff. And so one of our doctors was having a conversation with a doctor in her hospital. She is not in my hospital. And the doctor at the other hospital said, I know that I've been needing to kind of polish up my LGBTQ inclusive processes, but I don't even know where to start. Here's the really cool thing, because I use the same resources everywhere I go. This chiropractor takes into the medical doctor's office a paper written by a chiropractic college faculty and a chiropractic clinician, and the medical doctor then uses that information, though it's already available to medical doctors, to then modify her practice. So for me, going out and networking and making sure I know where to send my patient, when I need to send them to an orthopedist, I want the orthopedist to be as inclusive as we are or better. If I send them to somebody for primary care, I want them to be better than me. So that has been a little bit of a challenge, though. I think that if you're in Portland, you may have access to more inclusive providers of all types than we do in Dallas. But thankfully, and for almost any specialty that I would, make a referral, I have somebody on my referral list. So I just wanted to say that I've been really glad to be able to do that. And what's also helpful is I know where to go for my own care or where to recommend my husband goes for his care. Anyway, that's all about that. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah. Dr. Cohen.
That I'm really glad Dr. Fauché mentioned the referral network that he uses and how important that is. I think that's something that I just wanted to make a note about, is that like your practice can be as inclusive as possible, but you're also sort of responsible for who you send people to. And so if you create this safe space and then you send your patient off to somebody who traumatizes them, that it's not directly on you, but like that's something that you should probably do some work to prevent. And there's a lot of responsibility there too. So I'm glad that Dr. Fauché mentioned that, because that's something that's as important as what you do in your own clinic, is making sure that you're sending people to places that share the same values as you.
No, absolutely. That's really good. A good sort of point to end on, because that referral piece sometimes is maybe not included in some of these discussions. So anyone else have any further comments? All right. Again, I just want to thank each of our presenters today for their time and their energy and all that they bring to this chiropractic profession and helping it grow. It's really, really valuable. So if any of you folks who are watching this panel today have any questions, please direct any questions, comments, needs, if you'd like to contact any of the folks that are here today, to the Alumni Relations Office at University of Western States. And we will get back to you as soon as we get that information from the Alumni Relations Office. So again, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time and energy today. And thanks to UWS Alumni Office for engaging this group. We're very appreciative of that. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.